Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another HM1 in 2021. Today we're going to be talking about medical logistics, also known as supply. So I would argue that this is probably one of the most important chapters of the Corpsman Manual, because one of the topics is almost always supply on the HM1 bib. And typically, like, the subtopics are like supply management, supply admin, and just medical supply. So when supply is not only the name of the topic, but in the name of all three subtopics, typically a good idea to focus on this one. There's some key stuff in here. It's got a lot of little stuff. We'll talk about it. So logistics gets defined, which I don't think I need to do that for you. Talks about how a Naval Medical Logistics Command is the one in charge of the money and ordering stuff. Organizational structure, so Chief UMed is overall in charge. So that'll probably change with DHA, but as of now it's still BUMED. So DLA, Defense Logistics Agency, maintains centralized inventory management and physical distribution to MTFs, DTFs worldwide. So who's the one that maintains a centralized inventory management? DLA. Gives a bunch of definitions that I think you'll hear a lot of these just working in supply, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over them. This chapter is kind of meaty, so I'm going to stick with the important stuff. Still know these definitions, read them, love them. So the nav subs. It's important to at least try to remember a couple of these. Reason being, like, some of the questions will be like, what publication is this? And three of them will be the obviously wrong answer, one's the right one. But let's say it's asking about PrevMed and then P4085 shows up. Probably not the right answer unless it's specifying how to order stuff for PrevMed. So Naval Supply Systems Command Manual, P485. So P485 is supply. And that's broken up into 3 volumes: afloat, appendices, ashore. So I like to think of that as 1 and 3 is afloat and ashore, and then number 2 is appendices, appendicitis. I don't know. Volume 2 is appendices. Let's see. It talks about what the NAVSUP P845 does, but it gives the policies for supply stuff. The other one's the Millstrap Manual, which is the P409. That's what has all the coding information. So what supply manual has all the coding stuff in it? NAVSUP P409 Millstrap/Millstrap Manual. Then another one, NAVMed P5132 is all the equipment. So whereas 45 is supply, 409 is Millstrap, 5132 is the equipment management. Some more terminology. Again, this is all stuff to recognize. I think acronyms are always important because they'll try to throw some some unrelated acronyms that try to trip you up. So a couple we got here is PALT. So PALT is Procurement Administrative Lead Time, so time it takes for the agent to order against a requisition. Other one is Required Delivery Date, your RDD. Servmite, you should know that one. NAPS, oh man, I could go for a nap. Navy Acquisition Procedure Supplement, that provides guidance to FAR and DFARs for Navy contracting. And then DFAR. So DFAR is regs providing supplemental guidance to acquisition for regulation. And the FAR is what is used for acquisition of supplies and services with appropriate funds. Then FSS is your Federal Supply Schedule. So a couple acronyms. That's the only ones I'd really focus on because a lot of these kind of make sense what it is. Micro purchase, if you ever worked in supply, you probably had to deal with this. Micro purchase is anything under $3,000. Yeah. So operating budget is your annual budget. Quarterly funds can be rolled over, but they need to be used up by the end of the fiscal year. Your federal supply classification is made up of 2-digit codes. The Federal Supply Group and the Federal Supply Class. So first 2 group, second 2 class. Some examples: 6505 drugs and biological, 6508 and so forth. So you can make some flashcards to try to remember these. Like I said, I'm not a fan of trying to do the short-term recall because there's so many things you can remember in the bib. I think the time it would take for me to remember these on flashcards, there's other stuff I could probably study on. I'm trying to be more efficient with my studying. I think I skipped a page. I have like physical papers in front of me that I highlighted and made notes on. National stock numbers. I think it's important to know what an NSN is. So an NSN is basically a serial number for government equipment, and then it's broken down. So if you see up here, those are basically the FSCs. The FIC is this Federal Supply Classification, which is that grouping class, followed by a 9-digit NIN, which is the National Item Identification Number. And it has your 2-digit NCB code, and then the rest of the numbers right there, and the other 7 digits. Kind of complicated, but just remember first 4 is the FSC. There's a 9-digit NIN, and the NIN consists of the NCB and the other NIN numbers. It's super confusing, but just try to remember like what those are. You'll get it, especially working in supply. Stockage levels. So it gives you a handy little flow chart, and I'll go over that in a second. But first things first, it says right here that the most common method in accounting for items is looking at months of usage. I think that's important because, again, whenever you are looking in your exam and you see something where it's like, what's the most common shipboard pest? What's the most popular medication for this? What's the most common? What's the standardly used? It's usually something that probably will be on the exam because the military wants you to know what's the most common one. And here it says the most common way to express supply is in months of usage. And then in addition to the months of usage, there are 4 different measurements to look at what is the length of time between ordering. And then you get your little flowchart here on 5-7. So operating level is how much material you'll need to sustain ops between replenishment. So that's kind of like the lowest level. Safety level, so that's another 14 days on top of the operating level. Basically that means if our shipment gets delayed by 2 weeks, we're not SOL. Then stockage objective is basically those 7 days of supply plus the other 2 weeks for in case something's late. So stockage objectives are on 21 days. See, it's kind of confusing that all this is broken down by days, but it says months is how items are accounted for. So don't get tripped up on that. And then requisitioning executive. So that's the max that should be on hand to support operating levels. So requisitioning objective is the max you want. And that's pretty much your stockage objective, which is supporting current operations plus what's consumed during normal order and shipping time. So just to add another layer, it's basically another way to say operating level plus safety level is pretty much what stockage and that quantity is, which makes a requisitioning objective. Yeah, it's confusing, but study it. Let's see. Most accurate guide in determining supply is past experience. So that's why it's important to keep records. Order and ship time between when it is when you started the order and when it comes in, usually set for 30 days unless something's needed quicker. Got our forms, 67/113, 6700/12. If you're going to try to remember these, remember that 6700/13 is the less expensive one, and the Navman Ford 6700/12 is the more expensive stuff. So 13 least expensive and 14 more, or 13 less expensive, 12 more expensive. There you go, less than more. Let's see, it talks about pubs. DD forms, these are important. 1149, if you've worked in supply, you've probably had to make too many of these. You probably dream of 1149s. That's how you order open market items, and because it gives room for like what something is actually called. 1348 is something with an NSN. 1348 Tax 6 is material that cannot be identified by an NSN. And 1149 is the requisition and shipping document. $11.55, order for supply and services. So that's what you use when you need stuff with vendor. We got pictures of these forms, but honestly, ask your supply guy to show you what these look like if you're not sure. It's important to to really know what all this stuff looks like. Like the 1149, man, I close my eyes and it haunts me. Same with the 1348. See, so how to order, you just work in it. Sources of supply. Number 1 is local stock or a local Serve Mart. Serve Mart's like a little Walmart that you can use your card and buy stuff. 2, federal supply system. 3, prisons. 4, blind. So it kind of just goes down the list of what's your first priority and what's your last priority. I think probably maybe the most important thing is remember first and last. First priority, local activity stock or Serve Mart. Last priority is the prime vendor. Prime vendor is where you can buy stuff outside, and it's where you have to like have the competing quotes and all that. You're basically looking for the lowest price for what you need. Inventory management. Again, there's the naval supply, P45, tells you all about inventory control stuff. There's a couple different types of inventory, and I think these are important. So 1, controlled substance, that's what your CSIB does. I think that gets touched more in the pharmacy chapter. Bulkhead is the annual wall-to-wall. Specific Specific commodity is all items under the same FSC or that support the same operation. So bandage, IV fluid. Specific commodity, it's looking for something that's similar. And then the next one, I think these two are really similar. The next one is special material. Physical account of all items because of their physical characteristics are separate to inventory control. Actually, that kind of makes sense. So special material is like super important stuff that's controlled, so like needles. Whereas a specific commodity is like we're looking at all needles. Spot inventory is looking at spot inventory is unscheduled and it's verifying the existence of a specific item. So, hey, where is this? Are we out? Are we missing something? Location survey, 98%. It can happen during a spot check. So, hey, is this where it's supposed to be? Velocity is for things that move quick. So, because of velocity. Random sampling measures the stock record and just making sure that, hey, let's go check a couple of these over here. Let's go check a couple of those over there. Department inventory, so what's in stock in the department. And then war reserves, so that's stock that's saved for wartime stuff. And that's it for your different types of inventories. I think the biggest ones to remember are just like these 4. So, because again, bulkhead, kind of obvious what it is. So just specific commodity, special material, spot, velocity, location survey, random. So I'd remember those. Spend some time making flashcards or something so you know the difference. Safety, use your safety. Let's see. So make sure your sprinkler heads are with boxes are 18 inches below the sprinkler heads. How to receive materials. Let me flip forward a couple pages. So a couple things you check when you verify that equipment comes in. So date that you got it, circle the quantity, and then sign it to make sure it says that you got what you needed. A couple of pages basically just say how to do that. If stuff isn't correct, using a red pen, line through the incorrect, write down the correct number, and then circle the actual quantity received. Expired date material. Routine shipment should have at least 6 months of shelf life when you pick them up. Here's another form. Your ROD SF is 364. I like to think about that is there's 365 days in a year minus 1. So and again, 364 days in a year, that's a discrepancy. So I think your record of discrepancy is a SF 364. Yeah, that's really it. Material storage, a lot of this is kind of obvious. Make sure stuff is safe. There's different areas in a warehouse. So stock rotation, you want the oldest materials gone first. So that's called FIFO, first in, first out. If you ever take a accounting class or a supply class for college, you will hear FIFO a lot. It's important to know. Let's see. Hazmat, there's a whole Hazmat instruction for that, so let's not go over that too much. MSDS, make sure you have them. I know they're called SDSs now, but this is kind of an old manual. Talks about gases and chemicals, so just make sure things are safe. J-stock, that's important. So J-stock is any material that is unsuitable for issue. So anything that's like messed up and needs to be returned. Stock must be clearly marked as suspended to avoid anyone using it. So if we got mold on some equipment. DMLS, know what DMLS is, Defense Medical Logistics Standard Support. So maintenance types, this is important. So schedule maintenance is preventative, and so your PM and your PMS. Unscheduled maintenance is corrective when something's broken or malfunctioning, and then no maintenance required is if it's good to go. So if you think about your types of maintenance, so we got scheduled, unscheduled, and not required. Navy assets. So there's two types of PP&E property, real property and personal property. I don't think there's really too much on there, but there's some dollar amounts. So sub minor personal property, any asset worth 5K or less. Let's see, capitalized personal property equal to greater than 250 grand. Minor is between 5 grand and 250 grand. Let's see, equipment management, they do their thing. EPRC looks at equipment. Let's see, leased equipment, you can do it. Reporting unsatisfactory equipment. I think these are important to know. So type 1 basically means if you use it, you could get seriously hurt. So type 1 is any material that can cause serious illness. Type 2, it's harmful, deteriorated, or unsuitable. Type 3 is unsatisfactory because of some sort of malfunction, but it could probably still be used unless there's a direct hazard. So type 1, hey man, someone's going to die if you use this. Type 2, probably shouldn't use it. Type 3, you can use it, but not a good idea. So any type 1, you need to report immediately. Type 2 and type 3 are reported as soon as possible, but no later than 10 days. See, biomed stuff. And here we go. So again, if you remember, those types were how to report unsatisfactory equipment. Now there's 3 types of maintenance levels. I think it's important to kind of read through this on your own and look at the 3 different ones. It's kind of hard for me to explain, but there is a types of maintenance, like scheduled, unscheduled, and no maintenance required. You have your 3 levels of reporting unsatisfactory equipment, so 3. And then you have your 3 maintenance levels. So level 1 is performance testing. That's usually performed by the person using it. So your morning AM checks, your afternoon PM checks. 2 is preventative maintenance, and that's kind of the yearly checkup. 3 is complete overhaul. So think least invasive to most invasive. So step 1, yeah, let's tighten this screw here. It's something we do daily. Step 2, let's do our yearly uptick, our yearly review of the equipment. And then type 3 is that we need to replace major stuff. Talks about maintenance work orders. 6700/4 is the form. What to do with excess equipment. AMOLs, ADOLs, that's in like one of the Marine Corps bibs, so I wouldn't go too much into it, but AMOL and ADOL is basically a giant crate for one purpose, and there's a bunch of different ones that are branched out by their federal supply code. And that's it for supply. I hope this helped. Big things to remember are like, what are the different types of inventory? What are those dollar amounts? What are some of the forms? But again, this one is really heavy on like kind of the pop knowledge. So just remember what you can, because it's just important to know like what is not the right answer as it is to knowing what the right answer is. So the more you know about this stuff, even if you are guessing, if you screen out 2 questions because you know it doesn't even have anything to do with the subject, you just upped your chances of getting the right answer by 50%. So that's it. Have a good night, everybody.